Hello, everybody. Hope you are all doing well. I've got Chapter 10 here of Book 2 of the Royal Ranger series, The Red Fox Clan, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. On the way home, they passed the training ground where the cavalry were exercising their remounts. Each trooper traveling with Horace and Gillen would take 2 horses, so that the troop could travel more quickly without tiring the horses unduly. As Horace had observed, the bulk of the herd had been out to grass for several months, and had been skittish about being saddled and ridden once more. The troopers were getting them accustomed to the necessary discipline. "Looks like they're nearly ready," Matty remarked. Gillen nodded, eyeing the horses as they formed 4s, and then an extended line, then went to a trot, increasing tempo to a canter, and then a full gallop, while maintaining their formation. A few of the horses still shied and tugged at the reins, tossing their heads against the restricting bits. But overall, they were well behaved. After all, you never wanted a cavalry horse to become too docile. A bit of wildness could be a good thing. "So you'll be leaving tomorrow?" Matty said. There was a note of wistfulness in her voice. Gillen turned his attention from the horses to her. "Mid-morning," he said. "That'll give us time to get well on the way before we camp for the night." "Don't suppose I could go with you," she said, a little plaintively. "I could be quite useful, you know." "Yes, you could, and no, you can't," Gillen replied, smiling. "I don't want your mother mounting my head on a spike over the battlements. You're here to see her, not to come traipsing off with us to the northern part of the fief." "I'm here to see Dad as well," she said, but her half-hearted tone said she knew she was arguing in vain. "And you'll see him when we come back. We should only be a couple of weeks. Besides, I'll feel better knowing you're looking after things here." "You're not just saying that to make me feel better about staying here?" He shook his head firmly. "I don't do that. And I meant what I said. You're going into your 4th year of training. You should be able to cope with anything that crops up." Not that he expected anything out of the ordinary. Araluen was a well-organized, well-disciplined fief, as befitted the seat of the capital. But you never could be sure, as the incident with the 3 brigands had indicated. "Don't worry. You'll have plenty to do to keep you busy," he said. "And if you get bored, you could always spend your time trying to find the old secret tunnels in the castle." Matty pricked up her ears at that. "Tunnels? What tunnels?" He waved a hand vaguely in the air. "Oh, possibly just rumor and old wives' tales," he said. "The castle is supposed to be honeycombed with tunnels and secret stairways behind the walls. Duncan's grandfather was reputed to have a secret exit that led under the moat. He apparently used to pop out secretly to visit his girlfriend in the village. That was before he was married, of course," he added, in a very proper tone. Matty said nothing further, but she was thoughtful for the rest of the ride home. Secret tunnels and stairways sounded like a fascinating subject to explore. Gillen had noticed her preoccupation and smiled at her. He'd known that mention of secret tunnels would fire her imagination. She was a ranger, after all, and rangers had an active curiosity and interest in such matters. The small force left the following morning, as Gillen had predicted. Matty and Cassandra both embraced Horace and Gillen and stood by the portcullis gate as the horsemen and archers filed through in pairs. Each pair nodded a salute to Cassandra as they passed, and she favored them all with a brilliant smile. Matty watched her, realizing how popular she was with her soldiers, probably as a result of her background as a fighter and adventurer herself. They respected her courage and her fighting ability, and her grasp of tactics and strategy. They knew she would never set them a task they couldn't perform. The 2 women watched as the small force disappeared into the tree line at the bottom of the hill. For a few moments, a slight haze of dust marked where they had passed, and then the breeze dispersed it, and all was silent. "Well, that's that," Cassandra said, and turned to go back into the castle keep. "I suppose you're used to seeing Dad ride off to battle," Maddie said, as they strolled back across the cobbles. She knew that Horace had ridden out many times over the years to suppress local rebellions or hunt down bands of robbers and outlaws. Cassandra nodded. "Used to it, but I never like it." "He can look after himself," Maddie said. After all, she knew her father was the foremost knight in the kingdom. His achievements and abilities were legendary. "I know," her mother replied, "but there's always the chance something can go wrong. A broken stirrup leather, or a loose saddle girth, for example. Some things are outside his control." Maddie's expression grew worried. "Thanks," she said. "You've just ruined my day for me." Cassandra smiled. Her negative frame of mind was more the result of knowing she would miss Horace over the next few weeks. The two were very much in love, and in truth, she knew he could look after himself, broken stirrups or saddle girths notwithstanding. "He'll be fine. Don't worry," she said reassuringly. "I'm just a little blue because he's going. And besides, he has Gillen to look after him." Conscious of the need to keep her daughter occupied, knowing that palace life could become boring and restrictive for her, she added casually, "I have a session with Maikeru in 15 minutes. Care to come and watch?" "I'd love to," Maddie said, enthusiastically. "Dad said he's remarkable, and I've never seen a Nihonjan swordsman in action." When Cassandra had first visited Nihanya, the Emperor had been fascinated by the fact that both she and Alice, Will's future wife, were training in swordwomanship, arming themselves with lightweight sabers. There was no tradition of female warriors in Nihanja, and the Emperor, Shigeru, had decided that perhaps it might be a good thing if there were. The Emperor had sensed that the Nihonjan form of swordsmanship, which relied on speed and agility more than brute force, might well be suited to a woman's abilities. Cassandra and Horace, of course, had a large estate in Nihanja, a wedding gift from the Emperor. But with Duncan ill, they had not had an opportunity to visit their lands in the far distant kingdom for many years. To make up for their inability to travel, and knowing Cassandra's interest in martial arts, 2 years ago, the Emperor had decided to send Maikeru to her. Maikeru was a slightly built, wiry man. There wasn't an ounce of fat on his body. His hair was gray, and he was obviously in his 60s. Yet he moved lightly and without difficulty, and his swordplay was a wonder to behold. "I bring you 2 gifts from Emperor Shigeru," he'd said, when he first met Cassandra. He had held out a long parcel, wrapped in oilcloth. She had stepped forward to take it from him and unwrap the oilskin. Inside it was a Nihonjan katana, the long sword favored by the Senshi, warriors of the Sunrise Land. It was sheathed in a beautifully lacquered, black scabbard of polished wood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl shell. The blade, when she withdrew it, had a blue tinge to it, and curving lines along its length, showing where several rods of iron had been beaten together and shaped and tempered by a mastered swordsmith. It had a single edge, which was sharper than the sharpest razor, and a 2-handed handle with a small, flat, rectangular crosspiece to protect the user's hands. It was somewhat shorter than a conventional heirloom cavalry sword, and much lighter to wield. But the blade was far harder than any in the kingdom, save for the sax knives carried by the rangers, or the sword Horace wore, which had itself been fashioned by a Nihonjan craftsman many years before. "This is beautiful," she had said, sliding the blade back into its scabbard, and looking around curiously. There had been nothing else in the oilskin package. "But you said 2 gifts. Where's the second?" "I am the second," Maikeru said gravely, inclining his head to her. "I am a sword master of the 4th rank, and my lord Shigeru has charged me with the task of teaching you the use of the katana." Cassandra had been startled by the statement. "But it can take years to master the katana." Again, Maikeru had bowed to her. "Then I will remain here until you are skilled," he said. And so Cassandra had began her instruction under the amazing swordmaster, learning the cuts and thrusts, when to retreat, when to attack, how to face an Heirloom swordsman armed with sword and shield, how to use speed and cunning to defeat a more powerful warrior. She was an apt student, and Maikeru was pleased with her dedication and her progress. He was made welcome by Cassandra and Horace, as well as Gillen and the other warriors in the castle, and became a valued and respected member of the Heirloom court. Several of the more mature ladies of the court, most of them widows, found his upright bearing, impeccable manners, and formal approach to be more than a little attractive. Maikeru had left behind no family in Nihanja. His wife had passed away many years before, and they had no children. His loyalty was to Emperor Shigeru, but gradually he transferred that to the slim princess who ruled the island kingdom. And, as the first year turned into the second, Maikeru began to think of Heirloom as his home. Maikeru spent time each day with Cassandra, her other duties permitting, instructing her in the use of the katana and improving her technique. Now, she would be capable of holding her own with all but the finest swordsmen in Nihanja. Today, she was to practice with Demone, as Maikeru dictated that she must learn to fight against a style dissimilar to her own. Demone was a capable swordsman, not as skilled as Horace or Gillen, but a good match for her, and a good training partner who would not feel it necessary to hold back. For the bout, they met in the armory hall, a long bare room on the first floor of the keep. One wall was lined with tall windows that let the daylight flood into the room, providing excellent lighting for the practice bouts that were held there. There were tiered benches along the opposite wall, and Maddie found a seat there. Her mother was donning her padded practice jacket and protective leather helmet when Demone arrived, similarly attired. He selected a wooden practice sword and shield from the rack, and walked over to greet Maddie, smiling. Cassandra was armed with a wooden weapon, shaped like her katana, and replicating its weight and balance. "Nice to see you again," he said. Maddie returned the smile. Demone had been on duty since the day of the fair, and they hadn't seen each other in the intervening days, save for the occasional quick, friendly nod as they passed. "Good to see you," she said. "I have the day off tomorrow," he said. "Would you like to go hunting?" "That'd be great," she said. His smile widened. "I'm keen to see how you manage a proper bow." "I told you," she replied. "My weapon of choice is the sling." She frowned slightly, looking at the shield on his left arm. "Speaking of weapons, isn't my mother at a disadvantage here? She doesn't have a shield, so she has less to carry," he said. But Maddie turned to Maikeru and called out across the hall, "Maikeru-san, my mother has no shield. This isn't an even match." She was concerned that Cassandra might be hurt. She knew Demone was an excellent swordsman, and it seemed that he had an advantage over Cassandra's slim, wooden practice katana. Maikeru crossed the hall, his thin slippers whispering on the timber floor, scarred and marked by generations of practice weapons that had missed their mark and rebounded off the floorboards. He stopped a few meters away from Maddie and bowed briefly. "Your mother has a shield," he said. "You just can't see it. It is half a sword length in front of her, and is activated by the movement of her katana." Maddie frowned, not understanding. Demone, who had been through this exercise before with Cassandra, smiled encouragingly. "Wait and see," he said. "If you injure my mum," she said, "I won't go hunting with you tomorrow." Demone acknowledged the statement with a shake of his head. "If I injure your mum, I won't be going anywhere tomorrow myself." Maikeru motioned the two combatants to the center of the hall. They faced each other and took up their respective positions. Demone had his shield raised and his sword projecting halfway over the top of it. Cassandra faced him, her feet widely spaced, her katana held back over her right shoulder. Maikeru had a wooden rod in his hand. He began tapping it on the floor in a steady rhythm. Then he called, "Commence!" All right, that is going to be it for Chapter 10. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I'll look forward to seeing you guys next time in Chapter 11. God bless, and have a good one.